Welcome as we gather in this circle today, and those of you who join us online. We come making a place for each one of us, whoever we are, wherever we come from, whatever our week has been like, whatever our age or stage in life, whatever our sexual orientation or gender identity, whoever we are, wherever we come from, we have a place in this circle. In the month of March, in our spiritual gatherings, we're honoring this Oscar season and basing the theme of our gatherings on recently released movies that were winners or nominated for Academy Awards. And today, the movie that we're going to view a clip from and that we're going to think about is the movie Green Book. It's a road story, and so we sing about what it is to be on the road with one another as we gather in this time together.
We honor this circle this morning, and we honor this place in which we build this circle of community with one another. We are situated on ancestral sacred land of the Cree people of Treaty 6 and many other indigenous tribes and peoples, and for that we're grateful. We're here in the southwest corner of Edmonton on the ancestral lands of the Papas Chase First Nation, and for that we're grateful. We're here in central Alberta on the lands of our Métis brothers and sisters, and for that we're grateful. We come here in this place where our ancestors chose to settle or where we ourselves have made a home. And for that, we continue to be grateful. This is a place where we honor what has come before, what is happening now, and the hope of what we might build in the future. To seek to live in relationship with this land and all her peoples, and to work daily toward an attitude of reconciliation and partnership. It's in this spirit of gratitude that we gather in this place and make community with each other and for each other. And we light this candle, and whenever we do, we recognize the connections between us, among us, and around us. We recognize that as with this flame, constantly changing, constantly working at changing one substance into another, changing its form, its flicker, its sign of constant change and constant movement in our midst. And today, as we gather, we recognize that change is one of those necessary arrangements we have in life. That change is always happening in us and around us and to us. And that as we journey with one another, we recognize that we journey with each other to help us to cope, to adapt, to make new relationships and friendships in the midst of a constantly changing world. May this candle be our sign and our reminder of what is constant and what is changing, what is ever with us. This is our time for all ages, which means it's a time we are invited to this carpet for a story and a chat. And if you would like to come forward, regardless of whether you're just little or whether you're a tall, older person that's grown a little bit, you're welcome on the carpet. I'm reading a story called A Penguin Story. It's by Antoinette Portis. White, thinks Edna, like yesterday. Black, like tomorrow. Blue, blue, blue forever. There is white ice for sliding, says Edna. There is black night for seeing stars. There is blue sea for hunting fish. But there must be something else. Do you? Do you? I wonder if Edna sees that. Edna calls a little penguin, "Come play with us." "I can't," she says. "I'm busy." "Doing what?" asks the twins. "Looking for something that's not white, not black, and not blue." "When you get tired of looking, come play," says the little penguin. I wonder if it's like that orange plane. Edna calls a large penguin, "Come fish with me." "I can't," she says. "I'm busy." "Doing what?" "Looking for something." "You mean something to eat?" he asks, "like lunch?" "No," says Edna, "something else. When you get tired of looking, come fish," he says.
I see something.
I do too.
It's a pink orange.
Yeah, I know, it's up there. I will never get tired of looking, thinks Edna. Edna hasn't seen it yet. The next day she sets off to find something else. The large penguin packs her a lunch. Look at her lunch. It's a fish. She looks and looks and looks until, oof. Wow! I knew it! The world isn't only white, black, and blue. I don't know. Edna runs home as fast as she can. "I found the something else I was looking for. Come and see." So everyone rushes off without eating lunch or dinner. "Look," says Edna. "Wow," say the penguins. "This really is something else." They're meeting some new people here. There's that orange plane. When the scientists pack up their camp, Edna pitches in. It's the least she can do. The large penguin looks for lunch. The plane is ready to go. Thanks for the something else, thinks Edna. Oh, yeah. For the penguins, the way home seems short. Look, that scientist gave them one of their mitts, gloves. Wow, now we've got something that's not white, says Edna. Not black, says the twins. Not blue, says the little penguin. And definitely not lunch, says the large penguin. The next day, Edna wonders, what else could there be? Oh, has Edna seen it yet? Oh no, she hasn't. Oh, well, she's wondering, what else could there be? Maybe there's green in the world too. Oh, wow. Wouldn't that be great if Edna could see that? I know, those poor penguins. It's all black and white and blue for them until something exciting happens. Well, it's fun to read that book because it reminds us that there's always new things, and that new things can be scary, but sometimes new things are just really exciting, and they give us something different to think about. New people, new colors, new ways of doing things. It's really exciting.
These are the words of Ruth Feldman in her poem, Detour. It took a long time getting here. Much of it wasted on wrong turns, back roads riddled by ruts. I had adventures I would never have known if I'd proceeded as the crow flies. Superhighways are so sure of where they're going, they arrive too soon. A straight line isn't always the shortest distance between two people. Sometimes I act as though I'm heading somewhere else while imperceptibly I narrow the gap between you and me. I'm not sure I'll ever know the right way, but I didn't mind getting lost now and then. Maps don't know everything. In the words and images of this poet, may we find wisdom for our living. This is a story of an ancient road trip. It comes to us from the 1st century, handed down in the writings of the early Jewish Christian community in the book of Acts in the 9th chapter. And it goes like this. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of Jesus of Nazareth, went to the high priest of the day and asked for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might arrest them and bring them to Jerusalem. As he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a blinding light flashed around him. He fell to the ground and he heard a voice saying, "Saul, why do you persecute me?" Those traveling with him were speechless because they heard the voice, but they didn't see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he couldn't see anything. So they led him by the hand and took him into Damascus. The story goes on to tell us that in Damascus, he spent time with a man named Ananias, who was one of the leaders of the early Jewish Christian movement. And he spent time with other followers of the way. The story also tells us he not only regained his sight, but he completely changed his convictions. And he began to preach and teach about the way of Jesus. In this story shared by an early Christian community, as we continue our series inspired by Oscar-nominated movies, we're going to reflect a little bit on the movie Green Book. As you know, Green Book was the winner for Best Picture, and Mahershala Ali won for Best Supporting Actor, and it also won for Best Original Screenplay. The movie's named for a book that cataloged motels and restaurants that would be suitable for African Americans who were traveling in the United States in the 1960s. That is to say, it cataloged places that were appropriate for those where you would see signs colored only. It's the story of a relationship between two men, Tony Vallelonga and Don Shirley, and the experience they have together when Don Shirley, who is a composer, a jazz and classical musician, when he hires Tony Vallelonga, who had worked as a bouncer in New York nightclubs, hired him to become his driver for a tour that his record company was sponsoring across the deep south of the United States in 1962. It's inspired by a true friendship between these two men and based on the true fact that Tony did work for Don Shirley for these 8 weeks in this capacity. We're going to see 3 clips from the movie. We're going to see an opening clip that comes early on in the movie when we first meet Tony and his family and come to understand some of the bigotry, some of the racism that he carries with him. In the second scene, we're going to see the interview when Tony interviews for the job with Don Shirley. And then the third and final scene begins in a snowstorm with Tony driving, and it's the very last scene in the movie as they've completed the road trip, completed the concert tour, and are making their way back to New York City in order to get home in time for Christmas Eve. 2 apologies. First of all, an apology to those of you watching online that you're going to have to go get yourself a cup of coffee. and open your Google in your browser and have a look at a trailer, because copyright laws will not allow us to show you what we're going to see in this room. And an apology to those of you in this room that the clip is 14 minutes long and there's no popcorn. Road trips are dangerous. And it's not just the weather or the road conditions. It's not just language and cultural barriers. It's not just the risks of getting lost or running up against our privilege and our prejudice. It's not just the dangers of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Road trips really should come with a caution label. Travel at your own risk. You'll never be the same again. That's what happens in this movie to Don Shirley and to Tony Vallelonga when they spend 2 months together on a road trip in 1962 in the deep south of the United States. As you can see, Tony is a street-savvy, third-generation Italian-American born and raised in the Bronx, an unsophisticated, earthy, quick-tempered, profane-speaking, hard-working, family-loving guy who wears all of the bigotry that characterizes his family and his friends. He's desperate for work when the nightclub he's a bouncer in is closed for a few months, and he does the unthinkable. And he takes a job and works for a talented, highly educated, sophisticated, cultured African-American musical prodigy who's setting out on a classical tour with his trio. And across the miles, we witness the transformation that happens for each of them when they're changed by the road and they're changed by each other. Tony's hard edges soften as his respect for Dr. Don Shirley deepens. Dr. Don Shirley lets down his guard as he experiences Tony's fierce loyalty. Tony learns from Don that dignity is a higher road for anger than violence. And empathy begins to fill the spaces in him that prejudice had held for so long. After experiencing segregation in the bathrooms he can't use, in the stores he can't shop in the bars he can't enter, in the motels he can't stay in, after tolerating bigotry and violence, Dr. Don Shirley is empowered to walk away from the final concert when he is barred by his color from eating in the very Alabama dining room where his trio is to perform after dinner. Tony and Don learn from each other. They're changed by each other, and they're changed by the experiences they have on the road together. And in the end, Tony shuts down the bigoted comments of his family and he welcomes Don into his home. And Dr. Don Shirley steps out of his protected but lonely isolation to cross the threshold of a home in a neighborhood he wouldn't have imagined ever putting himself in. Green Book is a Damascus Road story. Not in the blinding light, knocked off your horse kind of way that the ancient story gives us in its very compressed version, but rather in the slow, steady, incremental, true-to-life kind of way that it happens. In the way that we are invariably changed by the road and those we travel with, like the slow sliver of insight, like the little crack of light that seeps into us when we begin to see something as though we were in someone else's shoes, like the imperceptible slow drip on a rock that softens our corners or breaks down our rock-solid beliefs into sand. In that ancient story we read a few moments ago, Saul is traveling on a road paved by his convictions. He's a pedigreed and pious scholar. He's a trusted religious leader who's been entrusted with a great duty. He's taken to the road to stamp out a heresy, to silence dissent. He's on the road to rid first century Judaism of those misguided fellow Jews who call themselves people of the way, those who are following the way of Jesus of Nazareth. Saul's traveling to put an end to this thing, to wipe out those people who find something that transcends their beliefs and their practices and their rituals in the teachings of a subversive and uncredentialed troublemaker who had gotten himself killed about 20 years earlier. Saul's on the road to do what he believes is the right thing. And instead of shutting them down, he ends up joining them. He goes from being one of their prime persecutors to becoming one of their most respected leaders. And we all know it couldn't have happened overnight. It began in an experience that shattered his certainty, but then in the world of the story, it was the hospitality of his enemies and the kindness of a community that he had sought to eliminate that opened his eyes and healed the hardness of his heart. It was the journey he had with Ananias and the others in Damascus that changed his heart and changed his mind and changed his direction. The road trip was the part of the story we didn't read. Those days with the disciples in Damascus, the part of the story that's silent in the record we have. Just as it was with Tony and Dawn, it was the part of the road trip we didn't watch here together this morning. The journey between the interview and the return home on Christmas Eve, it was the road they shared, the one that they wouldn't have imagined traveling on, that made all the difference. Green Books received a lot of criticism. It claims to be inspired by a true story, a true friendship. Dawn Shirley's family claims that although Dawn did hire Tony for this tour, their friendship was exaggerated in the movie and that Dawn wasn't adequately portrayed in the film. Others have criticized it as though it were driving Miss Daisy with a change in the seating arrangement. But for me, what matters is that the story the movie tells, irrespective of the historical characters or the facts, the story the movie tells speaks a truth about life. We are changed by the road, and we're changed by each other. We're changed by those we travel with. We're changed by the roads we take together. And maybe it is. That's why we need to see this genre of road trip movies, because we tend to forget the wisdom of Mark Nepo. To journey without being changed is to be a nomad. To change without journeying is to be a chameleon. But to journey and not be transformed by the journey, that's a tragedy. To journey and be transformed by the journey is to be a pilgrim. And we forget that although the shortest distance between 2 points might be a straight line, it isn't always the shortest distance between 2 people. It's the long, winding road we share of the experiences that wear down our privilege, our prejudice, our preconceived ideas, our stereotypes, our defensiveness. That's what narrows the gaps between us. And the poet's right. Maps don't know everything. They don't know that we need to get lost. We need to take wrong turns. We need to be in the ruts. We need to be on the back roads. We need to expose ourselves to the wide open road, the larger world beyond our smaller experiences of it. We need to find our way with each other and to each other. And we don't have to go very far to take a road trip. We don't have to travel from New York City to Birmingham. We don't have to travel from Jerusalem to Damascus. We don't have to get in our car. We don't have to get on our horse. We just have to travel a thought, an experience, an idea, a belief, a conviction with someone whose experience of the world, whose way of seeing things is different than ours. And it's not easy to do. In fact, it's very easy not to do. In the early 1980s, I was one of 2 ordained women in leadership in the Calgary MacLeod Presbytery of the Presbyterian Church of Canada. My colleague served a church in Fort Macleod. I was the only female clergy in that denomination in a city of 1 million people. I shared with some of you recently that when I arrived there in 1981, my congregation put my initials on the sign so we wouldn't prematurely tell people that the minister was a woman. A few years into my time there, I did a pulpit exchange one September Sunday with my colleague in Banff. He led my service in Calgary, I led his in Banff. And the congregation was full of tourists. A few minutes after I'd started the service, a woman who was just a few rows back from the front, seated in the middle of a crowded pew, got up and squeezed past all of her pewmates, walked down the aisle, left the church. At the end of the service, when I was greeted by a woman who was seated just a few people over from her, that woman vigorously shook my hand, and she said to me, "Now I know why I was always against women ministers." Because I never met one before. I think we smiled at one another as she let go of my hand, and we changed each other that morning. I changed my perception of those who stood against me because of my gender. And she changed her opinion about something she hadn't had any experience of. It's not easy to travel together. Where huge distances of ideology or politics or prejudice or theology, you name it, huge distances of thought separate us. Just a few weeks ago, I turned away from an opportunity to engage a conversation with someone I couldn't begin to understand. Someone whose views about just about everything were diametrically opposed to mine, and I missed the chance to be changed by what I might have discovered. The common humanity I might have glimpsed if I'd been willing to take the road trip of a hard conversation. So we're here to remind each other how to be pilgrims, to encourage each other, to risk the road, and accept the surprises of being changed. We're here to ask ourselves where an invitation to take to the road might be waiting for us right now. We're here to remind ourselves of the travel advisory. we won't be the same again. And that might just be the best thing that ever happens to us. See how much we're shaped by our experience and our exposure. We travel together. We don't go from this place alone. We each bring our light to this day, to this week, to this world. We go to shine with all that we are. We go to travel with those who are like us and those who are very unlike us. We go to be changed by this day and each day to come.